Hello everyone, my name is Danzig, and today we are back with another alternate history video. Today we're going to be doing what if Russia won the Crimean War. This will be a two-part This will be a two-part video. Because it's going to be a very long subject, so I'm going to keep the time to talk about it. And before we get into the video, I just want to say thank you for all the support that was given for last video with what if the Belgian Revolution ever happened. And thank you so much for the 11 subscribers. We literally were able to surpass 10 subscribers. Reminder, before that video we only had 7, so that was quite a good amount that just came out of nowhere. And thank you so much for the 51 views on that video. So yes, feel free to continue your support, I guess, and thank you a lot. Anyways, let's stop buffering and let's get into the video. So what if Russia won the Crimean War Part 1, another alternate history done with Danzig? So here's the plan. First we're going to start with the introduction and the context of the Crimean War. Then we're going to be seeing the points of divergence for our alternate history. Then we're going to start the first part of the alternate history. So now, the roads to the Crimean War. The Ottoman Empire in decline attracted the European powers who wanted to extend their spheres of influence in the Balkans and the Middle East, meaning conflict over the Ottomans was arriving. The European powers all had goals in the Ottoman Empire. The Austrians wanted to extend their borders in the Balkans. The Russians wanted to extend their sphere over the Orthodox Christians and Slavs in the empire. The Second French Empire under Napoleon I wanted to extend his influence over Roman Catholics in the Holy Land, controlled by the Ottomans, and the British wanted their businesses to prosper in the Middle Eastern nation. Alliances would be made between the nations and rivalries would rise between each other. The war was arriving. Conflict strikes. When the Ottomans offered Napoleon III the role of defender of the Christians of the Holy Land, the Russian Empire became furious because the French were in favor of Roman Catholics in the Holy Land, whilst for the Russians, the Orthodox Christians. And at the same time, this role had been the former role of the Russian Emperor. Nicholas I of Russia reacted by demanding the Ottomans to give back his role, but through refusal would cause conflict. The Russian declaration of war on the Ottomans and success in the northeastern Balkan territories would cause the British and French to demand Russia to stop the invasion, which they didn't, and resulted in Britain and France joining the war on the Ottoman side. The Crimean War endures. Austria, Russia's ally, would not join Russia in fear of Russian influence in the Slavic Orthodox Christian Balkans. Russia had a huge amount of men in the war and had a good start in naval warfare against the Ottomans, but it wasn't enough against the British and French. Naval superiority of the British would grant them a naval landing in Crimea, where the alliance would clash the most with the Russians. The British would suffer in Crimea despite being able to conquer the city of Sevastopol because of issues of professionalism, attrition, and bad healthcare for the army. It would take the healthcare reforms of Florence Nightingale to fix army healthcare and help the British army. The Russians would send waves of men to recapture their conquered Crimean cities, and would bring heavy casualties to the enemy British, but this would still not be enough. The Crimean War escalates. In 1855, Sardinia would join the Allied side against the Russians so that it could have discussions for Italian unification with the French. The British would also disrupt Russian trade in the Northern Sea, and Nicholas I of Russia would die, giving the rise to Alexander II. The Russians would attempt an offensive from the Caucasus, but this failed, and would continue the waves of men in Crimea. But it wasn't enough, and the French were even able to make some gains. The Russians, having noticed failure, sued for a peace treaty in 1856. The war had started a decline in Russia economically and ended its naval superiority in the Black Sea. This would be the beginning of more failures to come for the Russian Empire. So now, the points of divergence for my alternate history. First of all, Florence Nightingale would have to not exist so that the British wouldn't have a figurehead to start healthcare reform ideas for the armies, meaning that cholera and hygiene problems would have stayed and continued to kill many British and French soldiers in Crimea. Austria joins Russia, his ally, seeing the war as a chance for Austria to seize Balkan lands, in the south of their empire and not one for Russian dominance in the Balkans. And last but not least, Russia has a more successful navy and naval campaign, gaining superiority in the Black Sea and North Sea, and being able to win many naval invasions in the Ottoman territory, and wins against British warships, and also being able to protect its trade routes in the North Sea. Reminder, the Russian Navy was very promising during this time period and was the third strongest navy in Europe. So now, we're going to be discussing the Treaty of St. Petersburg. So, the treaty would have four things. First is the Austrian annexation of the Ottoman Principality of Serbia and Ottoman Vilayet of Bosnia. Second, the Russian annexation of the Ottoman Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia. Third, the Russian Emperor is the defender of the Christians of the Holy Land. And fourth, the Ottomans must demilitarize their navy of the Black Sea. So now let's see the direct effects of Russia winning the Crimean War. First is on the Ottoman Empire, which was known as the sick man of Europe, that was suffering from instability because of all its non-Turkish ethnic groups who weren't treated well by the Ottoman policies, which would be the reasons of the independence wars and revolutions in the Balkans later on. The Crimean victory in our timeline delayed the eventual Ottoman collapse in the Balkans. So in this timeline, Bulgarian, Albanian, Macedonian, and Montenegrin independence would be achieved in the end of the 1860s, instead of beginning of the 19,000s like in our timeline. The Ottomans would be receiving a huge hit economically and militarily after these events and would never be able to recover from it. These new Balkan nations would probably ally and be under the sphere of influence of the Russian Empire for strategic, religious, and cultural reasons. Now let's see the direct effects on the Russian Empire, or aka the Russian Bear. The balance of power would shift to the Russians immensely. They would have grown their sphere all over the Orthodox Christian Slavic Balkans. With a Crimean victory, they wouldn't go through a huge economic struggle and wouldn't be fearful of the British, meaning they wouldn't sell Alaska to the Americans because they did it to no longer border the British in Canada and gain enough money to stabilize the economy. Austria, having assisted the Russians in this timeline, would remain a very close ally to the Empire and would be assisted in its future conflicts. We would see more on that later. With the Russian Navy not being crushed and prove its promises, it would mean the Russians would gain a powerful navy like the British, meaning during the Russo-Japanese War, their naval invasion attempt would be a huge success and they would win the war against the Asian nation. Now, let's see what would be the fate of the Italian Wars of Unification. With the French Empire and Sardinia having lost the Crimean War, the Italian Wars of Unification would be very different. Napoleon III's empire was very unstable during this time period. He had hoped in the Crimean War that he would win and prove France had the greatest army in Europe and would have restored France to the grandeur during his uncle's reign. Meaning if he had lost the instability in France, it would have broke loose like what happened in our timeline when he lost the Franco-Prussian War, and France would go through political civil war but would end up with a Third Republic earlier. Napoleon, having lost power, wouldn't support Sardinia in the Italian Wars for Unification against the Austrians, whilst at the same time Austria would be helped by the Russians this time, meaning Sardinia would have been crushed. So in this timeline, all of northern Italy would have either have been in Austrian possession or under the Austrian sphere of influence, whilst in the south the Kingdom of Two Sicilies would stay out of it and would probably stay neutral in European politics, because they had the poorest part of Italy, had a smaller population, and a very weak military reputation. Now let's see the fate of the German Wars of Unification. With Austria having kept an alliance with Russia because it joined Russia in the war, the German Wars of Unification would be very different. Prussia in our timeline in the Second War of German Unification would go against Austria and many German states under its sphere of influence. However, in this timeline, they would have to fight the Russians also, meaning that the Prussians wouldn't crush Austria, but wouldn't be able to win, ending the conflict in a stalemate, which would mean Prussia would not be able to expand its influence over the German states under Austrian influence. This would mean that the German sovereign states would join the Austrian Empire, whilst the northern states would follow and join the Prussian Empire, which would become the North German Confederation. The Franco-Prussian War would probably not happen after such a terrible war, and a stronger rivalry would form between the Prussians and the Austro-Russian alliance. The Russo-British rivalry intensifies. The British and Russians had already gotten a very important rivalry after the Napoleonic Wars, both having powerful and large empires with a lot of potential for global domination. The Crimean War was the first and only time the two powers directly challenged each other, and came with huge failure for the Russians and for the British an unchanged status. With the Russians having won the conflict, gained a sphere all over the Balkans, defeated the rising Japanese, and allied the British, allied the Austrians who would now dominate northern Italy and southern Germany, and finally have a powerful navy that could pick up a fight against the British. The British would make sure to not let the Russians ever get another win. So now, we're going to be talking about the new world order that is forming. The British would probably ally with the North German Confederation, who hated the Austrians who had stopped them from unifying Germany, and the Russians for supporting the Austrians. The French would join the British alliance after having faced huge political problems after their huge defeat from the Russians. The British, not wanting another win against the Japanese, would heavily aid them to prepare them for another possible conflict. The Ottomans would join this alliance in the hope to restore its empire after receiving a huge hit from the Russians. The Balkans would stay good allies of the Austro-Russian alliance for cultural and religious similarities with the Russians. With a new world order having been set for the 20th century, with two major alliances, a war to end all wars is coming. But that's for part 2, so stay tuned everyone, and if you don't want to miss it. However, make sure to support the channel now. If you really like this video, please consider punching that like button down below. If you really like my channel and my alternate history videos, please consider punching that subscribe button, which is somewhere over there, I don't know where it is. And if you don't want to miss the part 2 of this alternate history and future alternate history videos, please make sure to punch that notification bell for notifications for future videos. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.